Hi there, this is Dani Beaumont. We're going to get started with a tips and tricks session in Adobe XD in just a couple minutes. I'm going to confirm audio and visual. Looks like we're probably good. Just waiting for a thumbs up. Excellent. We're all good. Hello and welcome to this month's tips and tricks session. My name is Dani Beaumont and I'm a principal product manager on the XD team. And I really like to use this session to take a little bit of a deeper approach towards Adobe XD and try to show you some of the tips and tricks that I've bumped into as I've myself learned the new features for the tool and also learn from you. We're going to focus today on voice-first design techniques. So in October of this year, we delivered voice capabilities along with the ability to prototype in Adobe XD. And as far as we know, that's really the first time you've been able to prototype voice-activated devices in this sort of a prototyping simulated mode. And part of what I wonder is what are real-world scenarios where customers that use XD are actually using the tool. So I'm always open to slightly making a fool out of myself and telling you how I think a really good workflow would be, and then hearing back from you about what you're actually doing. So I'm going to take the first stab, and I'm going to show you not just how to use voice commands with XD, but how to build a more sophisticated flow where you have basically a decision tree around the work that you're doing. So let's go ahead and switch over to my screen without my face, make things a little easier. And I do want to mention at the top of the hour that I'm doing these sessions about once a month. Next one will be in the new year. It's going to be on January 2nd, and it focuses on collaboration workflows, how you work with a team of stakeholders and designers. And for any of the sessions that you're seeing here, if you can't readily find them on Facebook, go ahead and jump over to YouTube and either look for Ping Dani or Dani Beaumont, and you can find these pre-recorded sessions, both tips and tricks and new features. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump into the XD application. So we're focusing on voice activation, voice integration with a prototype. And an example of a real world workflow. So as we look at voice integration, some of the common use cases that we've seen have been things like using it for an Alexa or a Google Assistant to practice how you might build out an application for that platform and how users would engage with it. When you're building out a prototype that includes voice, some of the basics that you've already learned still apply, just to state the obvious again, which is you do want to come up with sort of a narrative or a script. You can do this in Microsoft Word. You can do it on a single artboard in Adobe XD. But what you want to begin with is a storyboard. What is the goal that you have? What would your user want to be doing? And what are the steps to get to that place? In the same way you wireframe simple designs, you can use XD to just build out that back and forth dialogue with your voice assistant. So I have a flow that I've set up here somewhat briefly. Actually, let's swing up to the top here. So it's what I'm calling a linear flow, and it's a straight shot. And it could be used if, let's say, you were presenting to a client how you might engage with an Alexis show, let's say, in this particular example. And to a certain extent, for every question that you ask, there's a singular answer that you would go. It's kind of a straight linear flow, as the words say. So I do have a bit of a script here that I've built out. And as I mentioned, this could be in any word processing application. I'm going to pause for a second and just do a little bit of logistics. As I go along, I prefer this to be a dialogue and not a monologue. So please use the commenting area here in Facebook Live to ask questions. I've got a colleague of mine, Gabrielle, keeping an eye on chat there, and she will let me know if questions come up. I'm going to try to keep an eye on it myself. You're welcome to shout out where you're from and how you're feeling today in the meantime. But if you have questions, throw them in there. Okay. So here we are with a single artboard that has what I'm calling a linear flow. And part of the hard part to me is when we work with speech recognition and voice playback, there is some level of kind of fuzzy logic, I would say, or the ability to have the voice recognition recognize what you're saying. And the longer the sentence is that you're stating, the better chances you can be a little flexible with how you state your question. But when you're presenting, for example, to a client, you're going to want to make sure you get the question exactly right. So I have here that dialogue with Alexa. And the first thing I'm going to do is come in and just duplicate this artboard quite a few times. So I'll come in and select it, and I'm just going to duplicate it down the line here. What I want to do is now come in and start to break it out into steps. So I'll leave this first one in case I mess things up. But the second one, I'm going to begin with a question. So the user asks a question, Alexa, I want to talk to Majestic Airways. And then from there, I'll show pretty much the response. So Alexa will state something, welcome to Majestic Airways, and then so forth. I go in and ask the next question. So can I help you with that? Yes, please. I'm just going to jump along here and just delete what is not necessary at that point. Alexa asks another question. I provide another answer. And that proceeds all the way pretty much to the end. So let's see. Got that. I say no thanks. Good thing I didn't delete that yet. Duplicate one more artboard, which just will have the result. So I'll go with this guy and then step out there. So for myself, I become easily confused. So I am specifically breaking out my conversation in a very simple way. You'll notice I'm not moving it so that I can see where in the progression this conversation is going. But I have this simple back and forth all set. I ask a question, Alexa will provide an answer. And from here, I'm ready to now jump into my prototyping mode and start to add these commands and speech playbacks. So for that, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to prototype mode. And I'm here in that first linear flow artboard. And there's a question there. And as I mentioned, to a certain extent, our speech recognition engine is pretty smart, but being absolute is always your friend. So I'm going to come in and in this text area here, I'm just going to grab the text and I'm going to copy it to the clipboard. Notice that in prototype mode, I have the ability to drag a wire from an individual item here. When we start to talk about multiple flows with decision trees, this is going to be really important. For now, as I mentioned, we're going to have one command that comes up with one response. But I'll come on in here and select this wire, and I just want to drag it to that next artboard and release. And when I do so, I'm offered different trigger options here. So in the trigger dropdown, I'm going to select voice, and I know I want this to be a command. So I'll go to the command field, and I'm just going to paste, Alexa, talk to Majestic Airways. And it will automatically transition from this first artboard to a second artboard. Now, one of the things that may trip you up, it tripped me up when I first started working with voice in XD, is how you add the speech playback. It's a bit subtle here. We're actually working on a little bit more of an obvious way to show you that playback methodology. But here on this second artboard, rather than clicking on individual text, see how I could do that, I'm going to make sure I click on the overall artboard, which selects that artboard as a whole. What it allows me to do is come in and, oddly enough, not drag a wire here, but just click and release to release that wire. Now, what I want to do is actually be lazy and copy my text. So I'm going to come back out here and select just the answer part. I'll copy that to the clipboard. Going to go on in and select the artboard level again and click on that node. And instead of voice, here's another tricky bit. I'm going to use time-based transitions. So basically, it's going to say, once I land on this artboard, go ahead and give me speech playback. And I'd like you to speak this command, basically, what I want Alexa to say back to me. And I'm just going to proceed real quickly to do that going forward. So I'll come on in and grab yes, please, copy that to the clipboard. With that wire or that content selected, I'll drag a wire. I want to go in and use voice once again for a command. Come on in and grab her response, and I'm going to copy it. Go at the artboard level. Switch over to a time transition with speech playback that I'll paste into position. Just a few more times. Copy it. This is one way to start to remember what you're doing, is doing it over and over again. So I'll add that bit, get the flight status. We're almost there. And I'll copy that text for her to reply to. Select it as a speech playback with time transition. And let's see. See how easily confused I am? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and select no thanks. One last time here. Grab this wire and drag it. Notice that that doesn't work the first time you drag. That's what happens when you do things over and over again. You start to see patterns. So no thanks. She politely says thank you and goodbye. So I'm going to copy that up. Go to the artboard, set that as a time, speech playback, and paste that into position. Okay, so we have a very simple linear flow. And the nice part about prototyping in Adobe XD is that you can see what you're doing as you go along. So this may be how you make some decisions about your flow up front. So something that you use on your own. To begin with, I'm just going to take a look at my work in a flow right here in the desktop preview app. So I'm going to, here in that prototype mode, click on the linear flow artboard and set it as my home or my starting destination. From there, I can hit the play button here on the right, or just hit Command or Control Return, which is going to bring up that preview app. Notice that I did it wrong, so let's go do that again. This was my cheat sheet. I want to actually start here in this example. So I'll just set home at that location, Command or Control Return. And let's see if we get lucky. Now, the way I have this set up is Alexa's going to speak to me from my notebook computer microphone. So I'm going to lean forward a little bit and make sure we can all hear what she's got going on. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the space bar. Alexa, talk to Majestic Airways.
Welcome to Majestic Airways. I see you have a flight booked for later today. Can I help you with that?
Again, I'll hit the space bar. Yes, please.
Okay. I could give you the flight status, check you in for that flight, or make a change to that reservation. What would you like to do?
So to be honest here, this is a linear flow. I do want to show, obviously, that voice commands could allow a user to go in different directions. But for my demonstration, for my client, I know there's a distinct path. She's asking me for one of three choices. I'm going to pick the one I know is going to work, and I have a hint here letting me know what that is. Get the flight status.
Flight 233, departing San Francisco International Airport today at 12:20 p.m. and arriving at Heathrow Airport at 6:55 a.m. tomorrow morning, is currently on time. Anything else?
No thanks.
Thank you for choosing Majestic Airways, and enjoy your flight. Goodbye.
Okay, so I've got a reasonable prototype. Let's say I was ready to show this interaction to my client. And I've got these scripts that are all set up here. There's a really nice trick for just being able to kind of on the fly quickly build out some hints and tips for yourself as you use a tool like this. So what I want to do is go ahead and select this flow that I've defined, and instead of previewing it in the application here, I'm going to actually go in and create a web prototype. So to do that, I'll come to the Share menu here on the right, and in the drop-down, I'm going to click on Publish Prototype. And I'll go ahead and I've got a name here, Voice Linear Flow Script. That's terrific. Obviously, I did this before you came here because I do test things. Uh-oh. Okay, we're going to start from scratch, which is good. Let's do a new link because I did delete it because I thought I would trick you into thinking I hadn't done it before. I've gone in now and generated a new prototype. And I want to go ahead and take a look at that now in the browser. So I'll go ahead and bring up the browser version here. And it's off screen, so let's bring it over this way. So here in the web browser, I now have my prototype. and I can see the words that I've written here on the left. Here's a nice trick that I learned from Mark, the product manager for voice, which is using comments is actually a terrific way to start to give yourself hints when you're building out a prototype. So it seems a bit silly, but I'm here on this first artboard. I'm going to come in and make a comment, and I could be probably lazy. No, we're going to do it this way. Alexa, talk to Majestic Airways. I'm going to go ahead and submit or commit that as a comment to this artboard, right? So it's right there. Let's go to the next artboard.
Welcome to Majestic Airways. I see you have a flight booked for later today. Can I help you with that?
All I need to know is yes, please. I'll go ahead and add that comment.
Okay. I can give you the flight status, check you in for that flight, or make a change to that reservation. What would you like to do?
So you get a sense here. Anything that I need to say at any of these?
Flight 233, departing San Francisco International Airport today at 12:20 p.m. and arriving at Heathrow Airport at 6:55 a.m. tomorrow morning, is currently on time. Anything else?
I vote for one feature request to the Voice XD team, which is to be able to interrupt her, because sometimes she can just go on forever. Okay, I'm going to go on in here and just add the last bit. No thanks. And submit that. And I might just quickly skip back here, make sure that I submitted all those comments and that they're present. Okay, we've got that all set. I've sort of cooked the books. What I'm going to do now is come back to XD, and I just want to kind of look a little more magical as I'm presenting this. So I'm going to come in and take just some placeholder design here, and I'm going to copy it to the clipboard. I'm still in prototype mode, but you can do some basic things like copy and paste sometimes. I'll come in and select all of my artboards, and I'm just going to paste that little cover on top. Now, if you're a better artist than I am, one of the really sweet things you can do is do an auto animation that makes it look as though Alexa is actually speaking to you. It would take a series of time transition artboards with auto animate showing that animation. But it's kind of a fun way you can have not only a voice response, but to see something visually happen at the same time. Now that I've done that, I'm going to go back to that first artboard. We'll keep this one away so that I don't keep making that mistake. My starting point is here. I'm going to go back out, and I'm going to publish the prototype one more time. So I'll hit the update button. And now I'm kind of in a good place to walk into your conference room and give you a presentation. So I come on in and I have a link here, or I could give it to you as my client and you could interact with the solution. So notice at the bottom there real quickly, it says hold down the space bar while speaking to use voice commands. We've added this lately to give you more of a clue, give the viewer of a prototype a clue about how to interact with voice commands. So that tip was there. I also have my tip here. Notice that although I republished these artboards, because the artboard stayed effectively the same, the only thing that changed was some artwork was placed on top of them, I get to keep my comments there. So I don't see it here, but I can come up to my design and hold down the spacebar and talk to Alexa. Alexa, talk to Majestic Airways.
Welcome to Majestic Airways. I see you have a flight booked for later today. Can I help you with that?
Yes, please.
Okay. I can give you the flight status, check you in for that flight, or make a change to that reservation. What would you like to do?
So what we've done is looked at how you can take a clean script. Mantra number 1, make sure your scripts are clear, that you know exactly where you want to go. As you start to look at flow diagrams, start to think about a traditional decision tree. You may do that in XD. You may do it in a flow diagramming application, which might be a quicker way for you to come in and move elements around, but really decide the path that you're going to execute. The idea here, like any other interface that you're building, is you have to think about every nook and cranny, every corner, every user workflow. Make sure that your user has the appropriate guidance to successfully complete the task. So you guys are really quiet on chat, which is making me a little sad. So I'm just saying, I can see you. um, let's talk now about how you could do more of a decision tree or a flow. Remember when I said to Alexa, she said, "What do you want to do?" You can do one of three things. And I picked the one thing that I had pre-wired. Let's look at how we can wire in a decision tree in XD. So I'll come back into the application and I'm going to swing down here a little bit lower to a similar script that I've had in the past, similar to that initial flow. But in this instance, I'm starting to do just a lazy man decision tree. So you can imagine how these can become quite complex. It's another reason why you really want to think through exactly where you're going. If we look at some of these basic steps, I have just one pretty much simple decision here. So I ask Alexa, I tell her I want to talk to Majestic Airways. She says, "Welcome, what do you want to do?" From here, I could have actually created two separate artboards. I can either say flight status or I can say plan a trip. Based on how I answer it, I want the result to be different. So if I say plan a trip, I want her to say, "Where do you want to go?" If I say flight status, I want her to say, "Which flight do you want to check?" Right? Pretty obvious, but like I said, this is the steps I had to go through. So I've gone in and built out a bit of a flow diagram here that reflects that. So artboard number 1, I want to talk to Majestic Airways. She says, "Great, welcome. Where do you want to go? Flight status or plan a trip?" And I could have drawn lines here, for example, to show the flow. Because I'm about to wire it up, the lines can be a little bit intimidating. So I'm just going to leave it as simple artboards. But this is where one of the points that I made to you before about the speech recognition is really important. And that's the magic where you select individual items on the artboard rather than the overall artboard to define your speech command. So let's start from the beginning. We know our way around here pretty well now. So I'm going to start with my initial command, and I'll copy it to the clipboard. And there's my little wire. So I'll go ahead and drag the wire to my, see, first time never works. Pretty funny. Drag my wire the second time. And I'm going to go ahead and once again do a voice command. And we'll leave it at that. So I'll close that out. When I get here, she wants to say something to me. So I'm going to grab that. She's going to welcome me on board here. So I'm going to copy that, hit escape. Come on over to the artboard, to that destination node there, change it to time transition, speech playback, and then have that command for her there. Okay? So that's pretty straightforward. We now get to make a decision. I'm going to come on into this first one, flight status. Now, if any of you have ever really worked on an Alexa device, you would have already told me that if I didn't say, "Alexa, flight status," she wouldn't listen to me. To be really clear, I'm working in a home office and I have Siri behind me. It's a good thing because when you're testing this, if you have a real device in the room, you have to be careful what you say in front of her. But she would have expected me to say, "Alexa, flight status." It's a great thing for me to test or validate with users, for example. At the moment, I'm going to leave it as is, and I'm just going to come in and drag this wire twice, it seems, and drag it to this artboard that I've defined down here. So basically, I want this to be same. It's going to be voice. Say a command that will result in going to this artboard, right? I'm going to do it one more time. So notice I already have a wire on here. Plan a trip. I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to press and drag it to that second destination. Once again, we're going to, actually, XD does a good job, it's worth pointing out, of predicting what I'm going to do. So let's say I'm just going to say this because it's a tip. Let's say you have 30 artboards. And for 30 artboards, you're going to say 30 commands and you're going to have 30 responses. If you go through and do all of the commands at once, the display is going to predict what you're doing and repeat it for you. So for example, if I went in and just did all commands across all my artboards and then came back and did all of the responses, it's just a little easier, a couple less clicks here because whatever I've just done, XD is going to assume I'm going to do the same thing unless I tell it differently. So indeed, I'm doing the same thing twice here. I want to use a voice trigger with the command of plan a trip, and I want the destination to be this artboard here. Let's take this a little bit further. So now we've like basically split down the tree. I could come in and add a go back button in essence. I could add an exit command here. I can have many different commands. Notice I have 2 here, but I could have 30 commands. And if you're doing usability studies, let's say you just want to try to explore what users think when they see user interfaces, you could in essence bake in 50 different commands. You can hide them the way I did with this screen overlaid on top of those commands, but you can have many, many different commands to show what the results would be and do some real usability testing. Let's just take a look at what we've done so far real quick with this flow. I'm going to start here. Go ahead and set that as my home location. Alexa, talk to Majestic Airways.
Welcome to Majestic Airways. What would you like to do?
Let's try plan a trip because that's different, right? Plan a trip. I think I forgot for her to say something there. So where would you like to go? She would say somewhere warm. And we probably didn't go that far, but I at least got to that point. Let's try to go back. So I'm just going to hit the back button again here. Alexa, talk to Majestic Airways.
Welcome to Majestic Airways. What would you like to do?
Flight status. And then so forth there. So which flight would you like to check? Obviously, I did not put that speech playback in that location. Well, this is a half-hour session, and I've done that in 27 minutes, which means I have 3 minutes absolutely available, even a little longer, to answer any questions that came up with you. Looks like Beck Nelson has one. Do I have to download Alexa to my computer to use that function? You don't have to do anything. What you do need to do is make sure that you have a network connection when you're working with your prototype. So to be clear, everything, let's say I'm on an airplane, everything that I've done, all of the wiring up, all of the entering of commands and the speech playback, I can do that offline. But if I expect our voice engine underneath to recognize my words, I need to have a network connection because we actually license some Amazon technology. We use something called Poly, and Poly is the voice playback. And there's also an engine that we use that's voice recognition. Both of those are pretty robust back-end systems, but we dynamically load whatever we need from those systems using an internet connection. So no, you do not have to install anything on your machine. Your stakeholder, your clients, your colleagues that you're showing this work to has to have nothing. If I sent you the URL for the prototype that I built out, you'd be able to interact and that would dynamically work for you as long as you have a network connection. Good job, Beck, for the one and only question so far. What else do we have? Well, for me personally, the time just flew by. As I mentioned, I'm going to be back here in a month. I'm going to go ahead and put up that slide that has some of the details about our next session, assuming I can find it easily here. Okay, so if you do go to YouTube, you will see that there are about, I think this is probably the 3rd or 4th, maybe 5th tips and tricks session. If you have questions, you are allowed to reach out to me. Don't spam me. But if you go to Dani, D-A-N-I, at adobe.com, I will try to answer your question. I'm not exactly full-time tech support, but I'll do my best. Additionally, if you would like to join us again, as I mentioned, we'll be doing another session on December 2nd, right after the holidays are over, kicking off the new year. I'm focused on collaboration workflows. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.